On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in the performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. Further support is provided by Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, one of America's leading urban public libraries, delivering exceptional services and programs with a mission to improve lives and build a stronger community. And by the Arts and Science Council, Charlotte Mecklenburg's resource hub and lead advocate for the regional cultural community, providing culture for all.
I do spend a lot of time thinking about being Black in America. And I get tired of thinking about being Black in America. I spend time thinking about, am I enough for myself? Am I enough for my daughter? I spend time thinking about what conversations can I have? What kind of conversations do I need to stop having? What do I want to hold on to as my truth? And how can I begin to see whatever I'm experiencing, whether it's a painful moment or a good moment, as a way to constantly create the life I want to experience?
Tiffany Capers is an advocate for equity and possibility. She is Managing Director for Growth, Development, and Partnership for Teach for America Charlotte. She also helps lead and co-facilitate Black Lives Matter Charlotte, which seeks to raise awareness and develop actions to address racial, ethnic disparities. Tiffany previously served as Vice President of Community Programs and Civic Leadership Initiatives at the Foundation for the Carolinas. She is a visual artist and contributing columnist to TheCharlotte Observer and has been recognized by YWCA Charlotte Women of Achievement as a community champion. In this episode, we explore Black Lives Matter and issues of education, equity, social justice, and advocacy. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Tiffany, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Tiffany, you work with Teach for America.
I do.
And you also lead Black Lives Matter Charlotte.
I do.
I'd like to take those in turn.
Okay.
So let's begin with Teach for America.
Sure.
What is Teach for America and what is it that you do?
Teach for America is a national nonprofit organization whose mission is essentially to ensure that all day one children have the opportunity to attain an excellent education. And what that means is that we are an organization that seeks out, recruits young people, older people, people in between, to teach in high need schools, usually in rural or urban settings. Our core members, as we call them, commit to teaching for 2 years, and sometimes they stay in the classroom after that. Sometimes they go on to lead schools. Sometimes they go on to medical school or law school or become politicians. But ultimately, we hope that because they've had the experience, they have a better understanding of what it's going to take for us to ensure that all children really have the educational experience to put them on a path to whatever they want to be, whether it's college, whether it's career. But ultimately, they have the wherewithal to make those choices for themselves in the future. I am currently the Managing Director of Public Affairs and Engagement. So my team is responsible for some community involvement, some community engagement, some community outreach, as well as social media, as well as events. I also support our Executive Director with regards to the board and other actually sundry various to-dos that come across my desk.
Why is this work important to you?
It became important to me when I was working at the Foundation for the Carolinas, and Project Lift was getting started. And I was really becoming more aware of the inequities and the disparities that exist in our community with regards to education. I had been trying to raise some money, quite honestly, for the Project Lift initiative when the then executive director saw me out in the community having some conversations about the Project Lift work. I learned about Teach for America then and what its mission is and what it's trying to do. And it just kind of resonated with me that I think at my core, I gravitate towards equity and fairness and creating, quote unquote, a level playing field. And Teach for America is about that. So it spoke to me at my core in terms of what it has as its mission and the audience it's trying to reach in terms of young people, children, and students.
Tiffany, you also serve on the board of the Charlotte Post Foundation.
I do.
What is the Charlotte Post Foundation?
So the Charlotte Post Foundation is a nonprofit organization that is the community service arm, if you will, of the Charlotte Post newspaper. Gerald Johnson and Bob Johnson are the owners, if you will, of the Charlotte Post newspaper, and they created the foundation to focus on issues that are affecting the Charlotte community, issues like education, literacy, and social justice, civic engagement, kinds of conversations that we need to be having. An initiative of the Charlotte Post Foundation is Black Lives Matter Charlotte, of
Yes.
which you are co-facilitator,
Yes.
co-leader. How do you describe Black Lives Matter Charlotte? Black Lives Matter Charlotte grew out of a conversation that Gerald and I had with the board about what had been taking place in Charlotte at the time. It was 2014, 2015 when we started the conversation. Trayvon Martin, I think, was shot shortly thereafter, after we started having the conversation in 2015. Gerald and I both had been in spaces and places where a lot of people were having conversation about Black people, but there weren't a whole lot of Black people in the room. They'd be at 8 o'clock in the morning on Providence Road somewhere and like, well, this is really interesting and beneficial and good that these conversations are taking place, but where are the people being affected by these issues that are being discussed? So Black Lives Matter Charlotte grew out of that desire to create a place and space where we could help facilitate conversations for Black people, about Black people, with Black people. Now, not exclusively for Black folks, because we need everybody at the table and in the room to have these conversations, but it grew out of trying to fill that need. We created the concept around there being 4 critical areas, or 4 critical issues that we wanted to address, because we see them being interrelated. We talked about Black Lives Matter with respect to education, with respect to health, with respect to economic mobility, and with respect to crime. We saw these 4 issues as being interdependent. You couldn't solve one without solving the other. You couldn't address one without addressing the other. And so we wanted to create a series of conversations using those 4 areas as topics. We also, when we're in the space, challenge people to think about the conversation from three levels. Like, what can I do as an individual? What can we do as a community? And then what can we do to sort of disrupt the system, to disrupt the structures that perpetuate some of the disparities and disproportionality that we see? So that was the framing of it in 2015. We've kind of held true to that. The difficult part we've had, quite honestly, is figuring out how to take action and what action looks like. And we're landing just recently in this place of, maybe taking action is becoming informed. Protesting is cathartic and necessary. Sometimes it takes a more drastic action to get attention. However, oftentimes after that happens, you're left with the now what? We've marched, we've picketed, we've protested, we've demonstrated. What happens next? And so we really try to ask the audiences that gather with us, think about what do you really want to have happen, and how do we target our quote unquote agitation, advocacy towards the part of the puzzle, the part of the system, if you will, that really needs to be disrupted.
What is the part of the system that needs to be disrupted?
All parts of the system need to be disrupted, Mark. I don't think we think consciously about the system. And a lot of times in these conversations, particularly around race, we often go to the person, whatever might be going on between you and me, or white folks and Black folks, or Black folks, Latinos, Asians. But we very rarely think about the policies, the laws, the practices, the systems that are in place that really perpetuate some of the experiences that we're experiencing and the things that are happening. So, for instance, the system might be the educational system, the judicial system, the healthcare system. What are we doing to demand that those systems are fair and equitable and inclusive and diverse, such that we as people can have different experiences in this community?
Your group is not affiliated with the National Black Lives Matter organization.
It's not. When we started our conversations, I don't think the national organization had the structure in place that it has now. I believe they have affiliates now and regional offices in some places. And so we started our conversations before that infrastructure came online. And we quite honestly leveraged the words Black Lives Matter because we knew that it had some stickiness to it. We knew that it had some energy around it. So we wanted to borrow those words. And we haven't affiliated with the national organization in large part because they have a broader frame of reference in terms of what they're trying to reconcile both nationally, internationally. And our focus really has been on the Charlotte community and what we feel we need to be discussing. Now, obviously, there are overlaps between what we discuss and what the national organization discusses, but we're really very interested in staying local and talking about what's going on.
What is that difference in agenda?
So I haven't looked at the national agenda, but I know, for instance, they were having conversations around like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And we just haven't been that broad in our conversations. We probably share the same philosophy and ideology around inclusion in terms of obviously Black people and Black lives, around LGBTQ issues. But in terms of taking on some of the national and global and international issues that they are seeking to address for marginalized people and oppressed people, we haven't done that. So we've tried to be very deferential in terms of the national organization exists. We support and agree with many of the positions they've taken on a lot of the issues that affect people of color. But there are some areas that we haven't talked about or discussed on a local level. And so that's the reason we've made the distinction. Part of the message of Black Lives Matter, it is, in my mind, twofold. It is a message to Black people, because I do think we need to remind ourselves that our lives matter. We get caught up in the day-to-day. We get caught up in the pursuit of success and happiness and just living a good life, that we sometimes don't remember that not all of us are situated the same way. And that just because you might arrive at a certain level of economic success doesn't mean that you have achieved a certain level of racial, ethnic success or harmony. So it is a reminder to Black people that, yeah, Black Lives Matter. And here's how Black life on this side of town is experiencing Charlotte versus Black life on the other side of town. But it's also an invitation to communities that are not people of color. It's an invitation for them to understand like why those words are necessary, what's really happening. I think for a long time, people, particularly with the election of President Obama, I think people believe we lived in a post-racial society and that everything was good. Like we finally arrived. Yay, civil rights worked. The marches finally paid off. Everyone has equal opportunity to achieve and live their best lives. But when you look at the data, which is what we spend a lot of time doing in our conversations, is really giving people, like, these are the numbers. I might have an experience and Bob and Gerald might have experiences as Black people. But when you look at the data and you look at the disproportionality in all aspects of life, from education to health to economic mobility to crime, one would have a difficult time reconciling why are certain people having these experiences, but for race or ethnicity. You can explain away a lot of the other variables, and it really comes down to people having different experiences in this country based on how they look and what they look like. And so having a diverse audience works. It helps because people in positions of power, people in positions of influence are oftentimes people not of color. And so we need white people to get it and to be willing to advocate for it and to be willing to ask questions around it, just as much as we need Black people to get it and to advocate for it and ask questions around it.
The phrase Black Lives Matter gets a variety of responses.
Absolutely.
There are some people who fully embrace it, and there are other people who reject it.
Absolutely.
What don't people understand about Black Lives Matter?
I think inherently when people hear that, they hear only. They hear either only Black Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter exclusively or it's just Black lives that matter. And that is so far from the spirit and the intent of those words. And it goes back to what I was saying before, that when you really slice and dice the Black experience, and if you just look at data, you would be hard pressed to come away from any kind of robust or even superficial look at data and say that Black lives matter. I mean, when you look at health disparities and the fact that I think the stat is fewer Black women are diagnosed with breast cancer, but more Black women die of breast cancer. When you look at school suspension rates for children in CMS, I think through the 2015 school year, K through second grade, Black boys were suspended at a rate of 10 to 1. When you look at crime data around just police stops and how many Black men are stopped for minor traffic violations, it's at a rate of 10 to 1 or 15 to 1. So you just have to wonder, well, why is that? Why is that? So the question, the Black Lives Matter is an answer to, I guess, the question of do they matter? Yes, Black lives do matter. And it's not at the expense of any other lives. It's not that our lives matter exclusively. And oftentimes when I get the response well, all lives matter, it's yes, I agree. All lives do matter. And Black people are not having the experience in this country that would suggest that that's true.
What is the conversation within the Black community about Black Lives Matter?
There are several conversations I think that are taking place, because I think in part, we wanted this to be over as well. We didn't want to have to be having these conversations. Kind of tired of having to remind ourselves and remind others that we matter. So there's a part of the community that doesn't like that we're still having these conversations, that we still have to have these conversations. I think that's a part of it. I think there's some members of the community that I've had conversations with Black people who say all lives matter. And they most of them are people of faith. I think they come from a faith perspective that's not very quote unquote Christ-like to be saying that Black lives matter. That's not what he was about. I beg to differ. I think Jesus was pretty woke. I think he would have been down for Black Lives Matter. My faith teaches me that he came to be amongst the disenfranchised and the marginalized. So I think he'd be okay with it. I think that we are trying to reconcile the degree to which we are also committing crimes against one another and trying to figure out, well, if Black Lives Matter, then why are we also perpetuating or committing crimes against one another to the degree that we are? Now, it's not that white on white crime doesn't exist, because it does. And statistically, again, the rate of crime for white on white people is not that far from the rate of crime from black on black people against Black people. But Black on Black crime is what we hear, and there's a reason for that as well. So yeah, I don't know if I have a firm answer for what Black people think. Just as one Black person, I think it goes to the core of who we are as a community, that we believe our lives matter. I think we're again tired of having the conversation, tired of having to have the conversation. Some people are tired of having to educate members of the broader community about our history in this country. I think a part of what makes that question difficult for me to answer is because to own that question, to own that statement rather, one has to recognize that we haven't come as far as we thought we had. And Black people have to reconcile that even though I've done all the right things, even though I've gone to school, I have the good job, I live in the right neighborhood, I have my children in the right school, I've made all the right decisions, I can still be stopped on a highway, on a road in Charlotte because I'm Black. I could still be profiled while walking through South Park Mall. I am still fundamentally a Black person. And so I think there's this space that we want to be in as Black people where we really do feel as though the content of my character is all that matters, and that I'm going to be judged and assessed and evaluated fairly on my ability, on my aptitude, on my work ethic, on my willingness to work hard. And so to have to be in a place where I have to say Black Lives Matter means this place where I thought I arrived isn't really true. It's subject to the vagaries of racism. It's subject to the vagaries of bigotry and hatred. And I thought I had, quote unquote, worked myself out of that and away from that. So there is this level of dissonance, I think, that statement creates within the Black community that causes a degree of self-examination, that then causes some pain, that causes some discomfort that not all Black people want to experience or deal with.
Well, that is the difficulty, because how do you get past it if you're always in it? How do you get past racism if the conversation is about racism? How do you get out of that loop?
I don't know that it's on the Black community to just get out of that loop. I think it is a matter of acknowledging that it exists, that racism still exists. And I think it will always be amongst us, and that there is no degree of success that I can achieve as an individual that's going to move me from that. I am a Black woman and will always be a Black woman, and will experience this life as a Black woman. And I'm okay with that. And I know what comes with that. And I know the blessings and the burdens of that. It is not the desired end state for us to be colorblind. That is not the goal of any conversation that I'm having at Black Lives Matter Charlotte, any conversation I have with anyone. Being colorblind completely denies my existence. In a very superficial way, I am the person of color. So if you are denying or saying we don't want to see color, you are inherently saying you don't want to see me. And sitting in this tension and this discomfort around race is also what is necessary for us at this point in time. And it will be what we have to be comfortable doing forever. Because I really do think that this will be a conversation we'll be having for always. I don't think we will ever get to a place where we're not having conversations around race or racism.
What does it mean to be woke?
To be aware, to be conscious, to have a bit of understanding of the social, historical, socio-political path, history that's gotten us here. It is this understanding even of the limitations of your awareness.
Do you decide whether someone is woke or not?
I don't decide, but I'm human. So I judge and critique and evaluate and assess. And certainly there are markers by which one would say a person is woke or not woke. So I wouldn't be honest if I didn't say I wouldn't be honest if I didn't say, yeah, I might have an opinion about someone's degree of wokeness.
What is that marker to be sufficiently woke?
For instance, being in a place or space where you're making decisions about a community of color and recognizing you don't have a person of color at the table. That's an example of being woke.
Tokenism isn't being woke either.
Tokenism isn't being woke. I mean, in that instance, a person should say, hey, we're having a conversation about a community on this side of town, and we know that that community is most likely or predominantly Black, Hispanic, Latino, Asian. We need to have someone who can at least represent their voice at the table and or at least name they're making this decision in their absence. Tokenism would be having someone at the table but still not valuing or appreciating their perspective, not honoring what they can contribute to the conversation.
Do you ever feel the burden of having to speak on behalf of the Black community?
I feel the burden, but I reject it because I'm just one person. I can only speak from my perspective as one Black woman who happens to be a member of the Black community here in Charlotte. We have shared experiences, obviously, as people of a community can have. And my experiences might not be that unique from other Black women, but no, I reserve the right not to speak on behalf of all Black people or all Black women.
We often use phrases Black community, white community, and we paint with a broad brush in how we define who people are and what they think and how they behave and how they should behave.
Sure, absolutely.
The uprising in response to the Keith Lamont Scott death gave rise to the Opportunity Task Force to identify underlying disparity issues and what can be done about them. What are your thoughts about the task force and the report that was issued?
So the task force grew out of the Harvard study a few years back that cited Charlotte as being 50th out of 50 cities with regards to upward mobility. And for the longest time, I believe the task force was really thinking about what needed to happen for Charlotte to close the economic opportunity gap and how to make sure that all of our citizens had appropriate access to moving up and out of their economic situations. The Keith Scott Lamont shooting happened during the midst of the task force work. And I think it really just put a fine point on the underlying tensions that have been in the community for a long time. And it just made their work a little bit more significant, a little bit more important, because they were beginning to address some of the big elephants in the community. I don't know, though, that the degree to which we try to tie together that shooting as solely being a result of lack of economic opportunity. I think we've tried to do that as a community, and I don't know that that's an appropriate connection to make.
Many things did get conflated after that event, right? In the moment, it was a response to police aggression. And then in the days that followed, many other underlying issues got conflated as part of the uprising that may not have even been mentioned that night. How do you reflect on that?
I think you named it. I think we were in a moment in this community, we were trying to reconcile so many truths, and the task force being the new big thing in Charlotte. I think we wanted to use that as an opportunity to solve all of our ills. And so we appropriately, one could argue, laid a lot of our community challenges at the feet of the task force and at the feet of this work. And as I said, the task force began its work prior to the shooting. So it got conflated, as you said, in the midst of all the conversations we began to have as a community.
I'd like to read from you a sentence from the executive summary that was part of the task force report. Quote, "After much deliberation and fierce debate, we narrowed our focus to 3 highly interrelated determinants we believe are most likely to have the greatest influence on the opportunity trajectory of an individual. 1, early care and education. 2, college and career readiness. And 3, child and family stability." What do you make of that conclusion and the focus of those areas of intervention?
Well, let me say I have had conversations with Dr. Garman Brown, and I've met Dee Odell, and I know James Ford. So all great people trying to do great work, trying to put forth yeoman's work, quite honestly, to move this conversation and these issues forward in our community. On the surface, Mark, I think those make sense. Just at an intuitive level. Do we need to think about how early can we start interrupting and disrupting some of the outcomes that people are facing? So yeah, let's start with early childhood. Let's make sure that young people have a sound and solid foundation. Education. Yeah, makes sense. If you are not educated, you are going to be hard pressed to find a job, to earn a living, to afford to live in this community. So, okay, that makes sense. The family stability, that one was a little bit of an outlier for me. I think we get into some potentially dicey waters when we start thinking about family structure and how people decide to create their families, with the history of a lot of things that's happened in North Carolina around eugenics laws and just even cultural norms around what families should, could, can look like. That one is a bit of an outlier. Understand, though, statistically, 2-person households fare better. You have a better chance of creating an economic foundation, if you will, if you're in a household with 2 people earning a good living. One could argue if you have 1 person in a household making 6 figures, you probably would do okay as well.
But it's more than that. It's also a comment about male role modeling and stability in marriages and what young children are exposed to growing up. I mean, that's part of the comment about the dysfunction that's occurring in communities when family structures break down. You wouldn't disagree that has an impact.
Well, you're saying family structures break down. I don't know that those families weren't single parent families by design. And it is, I think, a part of the dominant culture that believes there has to be a family in a certain way. And as I said, if you think about economics, if you have 1 person making a certain income, just from an economic perspective, you'd probably be okay. If you're in a single parent home and your parent is making enough money to afford daycare or childcare and afford health care and to be available for school outings and to contribute to an education that results in raising a child that can also contribute to society, I think that would be fine.
Is part of it the discomfort is that it forces the Black community to look at their own choices? Well,
not discomfort on my part. And if you want to look at systems and choices, then you have to also look at, again, laws that were put in place that also disrupted and broke up the Black family. And so we have to take the question in totality. Oftentimes people want to cite choices, and some people make choices among limited options. And I don't want to be in a position where I am sort of indicting a person, a family, for a choice that they made or a choice that was available to them to make, and say because of that, then you don't deserve an opportunity to enjoy this community to its fullest. It's a very slippery slope in my mind to begin down that path. And as you've pointed out with the others, there are obvious systems and structures as education and health, and it's easier fixes when you start getting into family structure and personal choices. That one makes it a little bit more challenging, a little bit more nuanced.
Tiffany, you grew up in South Carolina.
I did.
What was your childhood like?
I grew up in a very rural part of South Carolina, a small town called Jamestown. A lot of cousins around, grandparents, 2-parent home, older sister, 2 younger brothers. A lot of adventures in the woods. Would go to New Jersey for the summer. My grandmother lived in New Jersey, but really sort of innocent, free-for-all, hot, mosquito-filled childhood in the rural part of South Carolina. I went to high school, to small high school, went to college at USC in Columbia, and then ended up in Charlotte.
What are your memories of your mom and dad?
I remember my dad being hardworking. He worked at DuPont. He worked shift work. So with some weeks he'd be home during the day and some weeks he'd be home at night. Very focused on being a provider and making sure we had what we needed. I didn't grow up wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. I made a lot of my clothes in school. I made pageant gowns and prom dress. But we had everything that we needed. I remember playing with my younger brothers more so than my older sister. So I have a lot more memories of climbing trees and doing things with them. My mom was pretty much a stay-at-home mom. She would work part-time either at daycare centers or elder care centers. Very, very loving and a crafts person. We had a closet in our house that was just full of fabric, and she and my dad would have a lot of conversations about her buying all this material. But yeah, it was an innocent childhood. Very much out of the door, crack of dawn, early morning, and not coming back in until dusk. And it was perfectly fine. So
if you had to identify one or two core values of the family, what would they be?
I don't know if it's a core value or not, but definitely faith. Grew up in a family where church was very important. I sort of redefined my relationship with God as I've gotten older, but that was definitely a part of my upbringing. And also, I would say caring and being generous. I just remember my grandfather and my mom just really caring about people and caring about their welfare. My mom literally gave her coat away to a young girl who didn't have a coat. She took her coat off her back and gave it to this little girl, a young woman. So just being giving and being generous and looking out for others.
How are you like your parents?
Well, let's see. Even though my mom was very caring and generous, she was loud and argumentative. I can be loud and argumentative, but I do have a regard for other people. I think that's probably what drives a lot of what I do, is trying to be concerned about the other. That's really important to me. And having a relationship with God. I can't really say that I have the same view that I had when I was a child. I grew up in a Pentecostal church in rural South Carolina. Yeah, we can talk. That can do some things to a person. So just seeing God in a different way. Still having that relationship as opposed to having religion. I'm trying to focus on having relationship.
How would your friends in high school have described you?
Quiet, smart, skinny. Leave her alone. I had older cousins. I had older male cousins who told a lot of the boys that I had crushes on to leave her alone. So lonely, perhaps. A late bloomer, maybe even. But kind and smart, probably would have been top of the list.
You went to the University of South Carolina.
I did.
And you studied psychology.
I did.
Why?
I went into college wanting to be in the medical field, and then I ran into organic chemistry, and that did not work. I went to a very, very small high school, and going to USC was a bit of a culture shock for me. I probably should have gone to a smaller college, university. I was a big fish in a small pond in high school, and went to USC and became a very, very small guppy in the ocean. And choosing that major and not really having, quite honestly, the educational background that I needed to be a strong student in science, it didn't work out so well. So I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do or be or study at a minimum. And my sister was a psychology major, and she talked to me about some of the courses she'd been taking and found it kind of interesting. So I decided to change my major to psychology.
And you then earned a master's degree in psychology at the University of North Carolina here in Charlotte, and that was in industrial organizational psychology.
Yes. My senior year at USC, I took a class in industrial organizational psychology and was very, very intrigued about how some of the theories, if you will, around organizations almost operating as people, how that could be a thing. And so the course was fascinating to think about human resources and people in organizations and how organizations affect people and their ability to perform and job performance and developing employees to their full potential, that became intriguing to me. So I was torn between coming to UNC Charlotte for a master's in industrial organizational psychology or going to school in Florida to study school psychology. But my mom passed away when I was 19 and I had two younger brothers at home. So I wanted to be within a day's drive of them. So coming to UNC Charlotte was a better fit for what I was interested in and a better fit for being able to get home to my brothers and my dad. So I came to UNC Charlotte and studied industrial organization psychology, got a master's degree in that, and then thought I was going to be a consultant. But very few businesses hire a 20-something-year-old to be an HR consultant. Didn't have a whole lot of experience under your belt, was the perception anyway. And so I ended up working for the city of Charlotte for a while, actually.
How has what you studied, psychology, industrial organization psychology, how does that inform how you see the world?
I think I'm a curious person, and I am oftentimes sitting and thinking, how is that person reaching that conclusion based on these set of circumstances or these variables? So I'm oftentimes in a space where I'm wondering who is the influencer? Is the person influencing this situation, the setting, the dynamics, or is it the setting that's influencing the person? And when it comes to organizations, obviously they're made up of people. People who are flawed, people who are healthy, people who are not, people who have their own quote unquote baggage that they bring into the world of work. And I'm intrigued by the degree to which we dismiss how much we creates the work environment, the culture, the existence we want to have. I think people think it just kind of happens. It's just happenstance. Like, no, we make decisions and choices. We put policies and procedures in place that impact the way people want to show up, can show up, the way that they can really live into their fullness and add value to whether it's work or whether it's home. We create environments that allow people to be either fully themselves or not. And so in recognizing that means you also have the power to change things, which I think is kind of intriguing that we also lose sight of that as well, that I created this situation and I'm not liking it. It's like, well, you have the power to create a different situation. Take some awareness, if you will, but it's possible.
A lot of your advocacy work seems to be very alert and keen to context and to group thinking.
Yes. And trying to, maybe not successful, but trying to raise this awareness level of the ability to create what we want to be true, that we do have the power to do that. And it kind of goes back to your question about me being a judge, people's level of wokeness or not. And yeah, that happens. But it's also that if we are self-aware, if we have knowledge and understanding, if we are experiencing something we don't, then we can create something that we do want to have.
There is that tension between seeing these systemic structural forces and personal agency.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of tension, and there has to be a point where you recognize the limits and the limitations of your own ability. And in recognizing the limits, almost also embracing, again, the fullness of that. Like you can either choose, I can only do this, or you can say, I can only do this. It's just the way you look at it.
And I can do more.
And I can do more.
Yeah. You did work for the city.
I did.
What work did you do there?
I started working for the city in neighborhood development and variety of jobs there. I started with the summer program, Mayor's Youth Employment Program, and then I worked with housing code enforcement. And then I managed the small business development program just prior to leaving the city of Charlotte. So spent some time in the budget office. So had a variety of positions at the city.
You then moved on to the Foundation for the Carolinas.
Yes.
What was your experience there?
Worked for the foundation for about 5 years, managing the scholarships program and the disaster and hardship relief program. And just prior to leaving, I was about to begin working in some of the civic engagement work that the foundation pursues. It was an interesting place to work because it sits at the nexus of so much in Charlotte. So many things come through the foundation, from economic to social causes to health and welfare. I mean, it really sits at a interesting crossroads within the community. And you get to see a lot from the philanthropic side, people who are interested in trying to make Charlotte a better place for all the right reasons. So I enjoyed being there. I also wanted it to do more. It's like, it's sitting at the crossroads. It can just wield all this influence. Let's go, 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 go. And obviously there are times when you need to go fast and times you need to go slow. So
is the foundation woke?
Well, I don't know if the foundation is woke. I think the foundation is probably more woke now than they were when I was there, quite honestly, given what's happened in our community. I think Charlotte is probably a little more woke now than it was, 6 years ago when I was there. So there is a level of consciousness. There are certainly more conversations that are taking place in the foundation around implicit bias and racism and structural racism and inequity and inequality than there might have been when I was there. So if they're not woke, they are awakening for sure.
Tiffany, you are also an artist. What kind of art do you do?
I am an artist. I reluctantly say that because it's like a big attribute to claim, and it's almost as if other people have to call you that. It doesn't feel right to call myself an artist. It seems like other people need to give you that title or that moniker. I paint. For a long time, I was painting in oils, a lot of female figure forms, abstract pieces. I have some art in some homes in Charlotte. I have some art, if it's still there, at the Levine Children's Hospital, some in some private collections. And now I paint with acrylics, and I paint very slowly. I've been looking at a painting on my wall now for 2 years. It's still not finished. It's a bit of a collage, mixed media, still figure forms, but it's something that I had been dabbling in for years that I keep saying when I grow up, that's what I'm really going to do and be. I haven't grown up yet, so that hasn't happened yet. But yeah, I paint a little bit.
Are you doing what you want to do?
Wow. I don't know. Some days I feel like I'm getting close. And I say I don't know because I didn't have as clear a path. These are all life lessons I pass along to younger people. I didn't have as clear a path in college as I now know that I needed to have with regards to what I wanted to be when I grew up. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And even though some attorneys tell me, no, you don't want to be a lawyer, I think I would have been good at being a lawyer. So I don't know if I were a lawyer, I'd be saying I'd want to be something else. It's just the way the world works and the way life happens. So I don't know if I am doing what I want to be doing. I think what I'm trying to focus on at this point in my life, Mark, is being who I want to be, in addition to maybe doing what I want to do. So I want to be someone who is contributing to broader conversations and maybe asking some hard questions and maybe struggling with some answers to some hard questions. And I want to be a filled person so that I can help pour into the lives of others. I want to be honest and reflective about, some choices that I made that I should have gone left and I went right. So I'm trying to be more me as opposed to so much of the doing. There's something, a super soul Sunday moment is like we're human beings, not human doings. I'm really trying to focus on the being.
You recently became a mom. I
did.
That is a big moment.
It is.
How is being a mom changing you, informing you?
That answer in terms of being is a part of that, because I really do want my daughter to experience a mom that is whole and healthy, and not so much that I figured everything out, but that I'm even comfortable with saying I haven't figured everything out in life. Here's some lessons I've learned and I'm continuing to learn. It's such a scary, awesome experience because, like no one can tell you what it's going to be like. I know all the big things I have to do. I have to keep her alive and fed. And so I'm winning at that. But when I look at her and think about, the conversations around like race and the conversations around like Me Too and the conversations around what do you want to be when you grow up? What can you be? What are you naturally good at doing? And what have I experienced you as, not as my daughter, but just as a human being, not that you're quote unquote mine, but you're here on this planet for a reason. Like all of those are big questions that I look at her and think about because I want her experience to be different from mine. I had great parents, but they didn't have conversations with me that I hope to have with her about who she wants to be in the world.
It's 2:00 in the morning. You're in bed looking at the ceiling. You're awake. What are you thinking about?
As a new mom, I'm often up at 2:00 in the morning and awake. I do spend a lot of time thinking about being Black in America. And I get tired of thinking about being Black in America. I spend time thinking about, am I enough for myself? Am I enough for my daughter? I spend time thinking about what conversations can I have? What kind of conversations do I need to stop having? What do I want to hold on to as my truth? And how can I begin to see whatever I'm experiencing, whether it's a painful moment or a good moment, as a way to constantly create the life I want to experience?
Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Tiffany Capers is Managing Director for Growth, Development, and Partnership for Teach for America Charlotte and co-leader of Black Lives Matter Charlotte. She holds a BA in Psychology from the University of South Carolina and an MA in Industrial Organizational Psychology from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. And now, a personal word. There are tells in every conversation, a word spoken or an unconscious action that reveals something true. I stay alert for those moments in this podcast, when a guest shares a story or gestures in a certain way as they sit across from me, as they offer a note or line that reveals something essential about them, a quality that I reflect on in these closing comments. It is the best part of this project for me, being with my guests as truths are revealed and thinking deeply about who they are. What was that moment with Tiffany? It was when she said that she paints, but she wasn't sure she was an artist, that she has been working on the same painting for over 2 years, and being called an artist was for others to judge. That was it for me. It summed everything up as I imagined Tiffany coming back to that painting again and again, picking up the brush, layering, reworking, her vision evolving, staying with the task, even as she is uncertain whether the painting is enough, whether she is enough. The painting, of course, is the work of social justice and advocacy. The work is endless. Outcomes are uncertain. Others may not think well of you. And yet you enter the breach, again and again, compelled by a vision of a more beautiful world. There is this quality to Tiffany that is the artist in full. Her advocacy is skilled and informed and referenced. There is text and subtext and context to what she does. There is pretext and post-text in her reading and writing and speaking and facilitating. She is in the world creating bending the arc of the moral universe toward justice. We see the public figure at work, her confidence and courage, and her talents impress. Yet to be with her privately is to see something in addition. And here is the part of her being an artist in full. She admits to self-doubt. She says she is uncertain about who she is and who she is yet to be. She yearns for greater meaning and satisfaction. And it is that very vulnerability that is her strength and reveals her as the artist of social change that she is. Tiffany talks about making all the right choices: education, work, community, parenthood, trying to be good and do good, and still being seen and heard as a Black woman in America with its blessings and burdens. That is her cross of contemplation and liberation. We each have our own crosses, some far more bearable than others, as we age and think about the choices we've made and who we are and who we want to be in the bodies we inhabit as time goes by. There is so much work to do, so much that needs repair. Tiffany talks about her daughter and the challenge and worries and hopes of bringing life into the world. Is she doing right by her child? Are we doing right by our children? Our children will let us know, as we let our parents know, as they let their parents know. It is an old story made new every night as we stare into the ceiling as the light dims. Read Tiffany's columns. Read the advocacy and prophetic voice. Read also the poetry, the rhythm of the sentences, the love that endures. To meet Tiffany is to confront ourselves, all of our complexity, all of our contradictions, all of our possibilities. That is the difference she is making. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Thank you to my partners Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, art and media director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value. Visit us also on our website, onlifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.